The collapse of night was filled with lights, music, and laughter. The grand hall of the billionaire's estate looked like a palace. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the crowd, golden curtains framed the tall windows, and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with the sweetness of freshly baked desserts. Guests in fine suits and glittering dresses walked around with glasses of champagne, whispering about the man of the evening, the billionaire himself. He was not an ordinary man. His face was familiar on magazine covers, his name flashed in newspapers, and his company stretched across the world. People admired him for his hard work and brilliant mind. Others envied him, jealous of the power and money he held. But whether they admired or envied him, one thing was certain: everyone respected him. He had built an empire from nothing, and tonight was meant to celebrate his achievements. It was his birthday gala, and more than 500 guests had arrived to honor him. The air was buzzing with excitement. Famous politicians, actors, business partners, and even rivals filled the room. The billionaire stood at the center, smiling as people gathered around him. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his watch glittered under the lights, and his voice carried with the confidence of a man used to being listened to. When the clock struck 9, the music faded and all eyes turned toward the stage. The billionaire walked up the steps slowly, greeted by applause. He raised his hand, asking for silence, and the crowd obeyed at once. He looked proud, standing tall in front of his guests, ready to give a speech that would inspire them once again. "My friends," he began, his deep voice echoing in the room, "tonight is not just my birthday. Tonight is proof that dreams, no matter how impossible, can come true. Years ago, I had nothing, not even enough money to buy myself a meal. But with determination, with belief, and with hard work, I reached here." The audience clapped, some nodding, others smiling. Cameras flashed as reporters captured every word. For a moment, the billionaire's eyes softened. He spoke about his struggles, about the nights he had slept hungry, and about the sacrifices he made to build his empire. But then something changed. In the middle of his sentence, his voice broke. He coughed once, then again, pressing a hand to his chest. At first, people thought it was just a pause, maybe a moment of emotion. But then his face twisted in pain. He clutched his chest harder, stumbling slightly on the stage. A sharp gasp spread across the hall. The billionaire's eyes widened, and the microphone slipped from his hand, falling with a loud screech. His body shook, his knees bent, and before anyone could react, he collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. For a second, the room was silent. Total shock froze everyone in place. Then chaos exploded. Women screamed, men shouted, and glasses dropped from trembling hands. The music stopped completely, leaving only the sound of panic. Guests rushed toward the stage, their shoes clattering on the marble floor. Security guards stormed forward, pushing the crowd back, shouting for space. Someone screamed, "Call 911." Another shouted, "Get a doctor." The billionaire lay still on the stage, his chest rising weakly, his lips pale. A few guests tried to climb up, but security blocked them, forming a shield around the fallen man. Phones appeared in shaking hands as people dialed emergency services. "We need help. The billionaire has collapsed." One man cried into his phone, his voice shaking. Another guest, already sweating, tried to loosen the billionaire's tie, whispering prayers under his breath. The sight of the powerful man lying helpless on the floor shocked everyone. Just minutes ago, he was standing tall, commanding the room with his voice and presence. Now, he looked fragile, almost ordinary, like any other human being facing the edge of life and death. The gala, which was supposed to be a celebration, had turned into a nightmare. People who came for joy now felt fear. Some covered their mouths in horror, others turned away, unable to watch. The golden lights of the chandeliers seemed colder now, and the music that had filled the air with happiness had been replaced by cries and confusion. Outside the estate, sirens began to echo in the distance, growing louder and closer. The paramedics were on their way. Guests prayed silently that help would arrive in time. The billionaire's breathing grew weaker, his eyes half closed. He tried to lift a hand, but it fell back to the floor. Everyone waited, their hearts pounding. As the seconds stretched into what felt like hours, they were watching a man worth billions struggle for his life. And there was nothing they could do but hope. The security team kept shouting for calm, but nothing could calm the fear spreading through the hall. The night of glamour had turned into a night of terror. The birthday of the most powerful man in the city now seemed like it might be his last. And just as the sirens grew louder, as hope flickered weakly in the eyes of the crowd, The billionaire lay still silent, pale, and fragile. The celebration was over. The fight for his life had begun. Asterisk, the arrival of the paramedics, sound of sirens sliced through the night like a blade. Red and blue lights flashed against the tall walls of the estate, dancing across the marble pillars and golden gates. Guests crowded near the windows, pressing their faces against the glass as the vehicle screeched to a halt outside. Within seconds, the heavy doors of the mansion swung open and the paramedics rushed in. There were so many of them, more than anyone had expected. 28 paramedics filled the hall, carrying bags of medical equipment, oxygen tanks, and defibrillators. Their green and white uniforms stood out sharply against the glittering gowns and tuxedos of the guests. The leader of the team, a tall man with sharp eyes, shouted, "Step back. Everyone move away." His voice was loud, commanding, and left no room for argument. Security guards quickly widened the circle around the stage, forcing the frightened guests back. The billionaire lay motionless under the blinding chandeliers, his face pale, his chest barely rising. The paramedics wasted no time. They knelt beside him, checking his pulse, attaching monitors, and shouting quick instructions to one another. Airway blocked? No, it's clear. Pulse weak, dropping fast. Prepare the defibrillator. The sound of the heart monitor filled the hall with a cruel rhythm beep. Beep, beep, slowing each second. Guests covered their ears, unable to bear the noise. One paramedic began chest compressions, his hands pressing hard against the billionaire's chest, counting loudly, 1, 2, 3, 4. Another paramedic placed an oxygen mask over the billionaire's mouth, squeezing the bag to push air into his lungs. Sweat dripped down their faces as they worked with desperate urgency, charging to 100 volts. A voice shouted. The defibrillator paddles were placed on the billionaire's chest. Clear. The body jolted upward, then fell back heavily. The heart monitor flickered, then steadied. A breath of relief swept through the hall, but only for a moment. The line began to dip again, weaker than before, still unstable. Increased to 300 volts. Another shock, another jolt. Still no improvement. The billionaire's face grew even paler, his lips now turning faintly blue. The guests whispered among themselves, their fear spreading like wildfire. Why isn't he waking up? They're the best paramedics, aren't they? How can this happen to a man who has everything? Some of the guests began crying quietly. Others simply stood frozen, unable to look away from the desperate scene on the stage. The paramedics worked tirelessly, each one taking turns. They performed every known procedure: compressions, airway checks, shocks, medication injections. The billionaire's chest rose and fell under their efforts, but his body gave no response. It was like watching life slowly slip through their fingers. No matter how tightly they tried to hold it, minutes passed. 10, 15, time, which usually moved quickly at such parties, now stretched painfully long. Every second felt like an hour. The leader of the paramedics pressed his lips together, frustration flashing in his eyes. He had handled countless emergencies before: car crashes, heart attacks, drownings, but never had he seen such resistance. Every time they thought they had stabilized the billionaire, his condition would suddenly crash again, like a cruel game of chance. He barked orders louder now, his voice cutting through the cries of the crowd. Increase for drip. Check airway again. Push another dose now. The floor of the stage was scattered with empty syringes, wrappings, and wires. The once perfect gala now looked like a battlefield. Asterisk, a woman in a silver dress fainted from the sight, collapsing into her husband's arms. Another man shouted angrily at the paramedics, "You're wasting time. Do something." But his voice was drowned by the chaos. The paramedics ignored the panic. Their faces showed no fear, only determination. Yet deep in their eyes, doubt was beginning to grow. The heart monitor's beeping grew slower, weaker. Beep, 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 almost flat. The line threatened to straighten. The leader clenched his fists. He wasn't ready to give up, not yet. He knelt close, his voice low but fierce. "Stay with us. Don't go now." Another round of compressions began. Another shock, another injection. And still nothing. The billionaire lay as still as stone, his body refusing to answer their efforts. The crowd could no longer stay silent. Murmurs turned into cries. Some began to pray out loud, their voices trembling. "Please God, save him. Please don't let him die." The guests had believed that wealth could solve everything, that with enough money, enough power, enough professionals, a man could escape fate itself. But tonight, in that glittering hall, reality struck them hard. Even the richest man could fall. Even 28 trained paramedics could fail. The leader of the team finally stepped back for a brief second, wiping the sweat from his brow. His chest rose and fell rapidly as he whispered to his colleague, "We're losing him. We've tried everything. What are we missing?" The other paramedic shook his head, eyes full of frustration. "I don't know. It's like his body is shutting down completely." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The billionaire's empire, his power, his money, none of it mattered now. All that mattered was the thin, fragile line on the monitor, and it was fading. People began to turn away, unable to watch anymore. Some believed it was over. Others clung to hope, though hope was slipping fast. The billionaire, once a symbol of unstoppable strength, now lay broken before their eyes. And yet somewhere in that vast hall, among the panicked guests and exhausted paramedics, eyes were watching carefully. Quiet eyes, observant eyes, a pair of eyes that would soon see what no one else could. But for now, the truth was cruel. 28 paramedics, the best of the best, had failed to save the billionaire. Asterisk, the poor girl in the far corner of the grand hall. Hidden behind tall golden pillars stood a girl no one noticed. Her clothes were plain, her shoes worn. She was not a guest, but a helper, hired only for the night to wash dishes and serve drinks. While the world's richest and most powerful people filled the mansion with their glitter and pride, she moved quietly in the background, carrying trays and wiping glasses. Her name was Alina. She was only 17, poor, unimportant, invisible, but her eyes were sharp. Watchful eyes missed nothing. From her corner, she had seen everything: the billionaire's speech, his sudden collapse, and the parade of paramedics rushing in like soldiers to a battlefield. She had seen the guests cry, scream, and panic. She had watched the endless cycle of shocks and compressions, the flashing machines, the injections. And she had felt something no one else had felt, a creeping sense that something was wrong. Not with the billionaire, but with the rescue. The paramedics were the best, weren't they? 28 of them, armed with the most advanced equipment money could buy. Yet the man on the stage grew paler by the second. The monitor screamed weakness, and his chest barely moved despite all their efforts. Alina's heart raced. She bit her lip, her hands trembling as she clutched the tray against her chest. She remembered nights when her mother, long gone now, had taught her simple remedies, simple truths about the body. Her mother had worked in a village clinic, far from the shining city. She had no machines, no monitors, no fancy uniforms. But she had taught Alina one thing: always look carefully. The body speaks. If the air is blocked, nothing else will save a person. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory now, clear and urgent. Alina stepped forward, closer to the crowd, her eyes fixed on the billionaire. The paramedics were bent over him, their hands moving quickly, their voices sharp and rushed. But then, as the billionaire's lips parted under the oxygen mask, Alina noticed something small, something everyone else had ignored: a swelling in his throat, a faint, strange color on his lips, not the deep blue of a heart attack, but a grayish purple. His chest rose and fell in strange, uneven gasps. Her eyes widened. She whispered under her breath, "He's choking." The words almost caught in her throat. Fear pressed against her chest. Who would listen to her? She was just a servant girl. These were experts, trained professionals. They would laugh at her, or worse, throw her out. But another glance at the billionaire's face silenced her fear. His body was failing. His life was slipping. And if no one did what she saw, he would die. Her heart hammered as she pushed through the crowd. Guests gasped in annoyance as the poor girl dared to brush against their expensive clothes. A man in a velvet suit snapped, "Watch where you're going." But she didn't stop. Step by step, she forced her way forward until she reached the barricade of security guards. "Stop. You can't go up there," one guard barked, shoving out his arm. Alina's voice shook, but it came out louder than she expected. "He's not having a heart attack. He's choking." The hall fell into stunned silence. Guests turned, eyes narrowing at the bold, trembling girl. The guards glared, ready to drag her away. One laughed cruelly, "And who are you to say that? Go back to the kitchen." But Alina did not move. She raised her chin, her eyes burning with desperate courage. "Look at his throat. Look at his lips. You're shocking the heart, but his airway is blocked. He needs help to breathe, not another shock." The leader of the paramedics froze. His gloved hands hovered above the billionaire's chest. For a second, doubt flickered in his eyes. Could it be possible? But then pride and training clouded his mind. He shook his head. We've checked the airway clear. He snapped. No. Alina cried, her voice cracking. Not clear. Something stuck. Please let me show you. Gasps spread through the crowd. The richest guests, the most powerful officials, all stared in disbelief at the poor girl who dared to challenge professionals. Some shook their heads. Others whispered angrily, "What is she doing? Ridiculous." But in that silence, the billionaire's body twitched weakly. The monitor wailed. His chest barely rose. And then it flatlined. The screen showed a straight, deadly line. The room exploded into chaos again. Guests screamed. Some fainted. Others buried their faces in their hands. The paramedics shouted orders frantically, grabbing new equipment, preparing another shock. But Alina knew another shock would do nothing. If the airway was blocked, the man was already suffocating, with tears filling her eyes. She screamed, louder than she had ever screamed before. "He will die if you don't let me try." Something in her voice, something raw, desperate, and true, pierced through the noise. The paramedic leader stopped again, his eyes darting to the billionaire's face, then to the girl. He hesitated. Just one heartbeat of hesitation, Alina dropped the tray from her hands. It clattered loudly on the marble floor, echoing like a bell. She rushed past the guard before anyone could stop her. She fell to her knees beside the billionaire, her hands shaking, her breath fast. The guests cried out in shock. The guards moved to pull her back, but the paramedic leader raised his hand sharply. "Wait!" Alina's small hands moved quickly, guided by her memory of her mother's lessons. She tilted the billionaire's head, pressed her ear close to his mouth. No air. She looked at his throat again. Yes, the swelling. The sign. She positioned herself, wrapped her arms around his chest, and pressed hard below his ribs. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th thrust, a sharp sound cut through the hall. The billionaire's body jerked, and then, with a wet, choking cough, a small piece of food shot from his throat. Rolling across the stage, a collective gasp filled the room. The billionaire sucked in a deep, desperate breath. His chest rose. His eyes fluttered open, just barely. The monitor beeped again, slow at first, then steadier. The hall was silent. Silent as death except for the sound of the man breathing. Guests stared in disbelief, their jaws open, their eyes wide. 28 paramedics, trained and equipped, had failed. And yet a poor girl, a servant, had done what none of them could. The billionaire coughed again, weak but alive. His eyes rolled toward the girl kneeling beside him. Alina's face was wet with tears, her body trembling. But she held his hand firmly, whispering, "You're safe now. You're safe." The paramedics looked at one another, shame and shock painted across their faces. The leader slowly lowered his head, and in that grand hall, where power and wealth once ruled, silence now bowed to the courage of a girl no one had seen until tonight. The girl who saw what others missed. The girl who gave life back to the billionaire. The revelation hall was frozen in silence. The billionaire lay on the stage, his chest rising and falling slowly, each breath a victory over death itself. His lips regained faint color, and though his body was weak, life had returned. The guests, who had once filled the mansion with laughter and chatter, now stood like statues. Their wide eyes shifted from the billionaire's face to the girl kneeling beside him. Her hands still shook, her hair stuck to her damp forehead, and her servant's uniform was creased and stained. But in that moment, she looked larger than life, like a warrior who had just pulled a king from the edge of a grave. The piece of food that had almost stolen his life lay on the polished marble floor, small and unremarkable. And yet it was proof that she had been right and everyone else had been wrong. The paramedics stared at it too, their faces pale. 28 of them, trained, armed with machines and knowledge, had fought desperately for 20 minutes. They had used every method, every tool, every ounce of energy they had. But it was the poor girl, untrained, unnoticed, unwanted, who had done what they could not. One guest whispered, almost afraid to speak aloud, She saved him." The whisper spread through the crowd like wildfire. Soon the hall was filled with murmurs. That girl saved him. She knew what they didn't. She saw the truth. But not all voices carried admiration. Some were sharp, cruel, unable to accept the sight before them. "Impossible," a man muttered angrily. "She must have been lucky." Another scoffed. "What does a servant girl know about medicine?" It was chance, nothing more. The paramedics shifted uneasily, their pride wounded. The leader clenched his fists. He wanted to argue, to insist they had been right, that their training was superior. But even he could not deny the reality breathing before his eyes. The billionaire lived because of her. The billionaire himself stirred weakly, his eyes half opening. His vision was blurred, his body heavy, but he felt something warm, someone's hand clutching his own. He turned his head slightly and saw her. The girl, the stranger, the one who had dragged him back from the edge. For a moment, confusion crossed his face. Then realization dawned. His lips trembled, and a faint, broken whisper escaped him. "You, save me." Tears welled in Alina's eyes. She shook her head quickly, almost shy to accept it. "I only saw what was wrong. I couldn't let you die." The guests gasped at the exchange. Never had they seen the billionaire proud, untouchable, almost godlike speak so softly, so vulnerably, to anyone. And yet here he was, addressing a poor servant girl as though she were the only person in the world. A wave of shame spread through the hall. The guests had stood frozen. The paramedics had worked in circles. And it was she, the girl they had ignored, who had dared to act. The paramedic leader finally spoke, his voice hoarse. We missed it." He looked at the girl, his eyes heavy with something between respect and humiliation. "You were right." Gasps followed. For a professional to admit failure was rare. For him to admit it to a serving girl was unthinkable. But truth left no room for pride. Alina bowed her head slightly. She had not done it for glory, nor for recognition. She had done it because she could not watch a man die when she knew how to save him. But the room around her was shifting. Guests who had once sneered at her now stared with awe. A woman in pearls whispered to her husband, "Do you see her eyes? That's not luck. That's courage." Another guest muttered, "Maybe she saved him because she saw what we couldn't. Because she cared." The billionaire, still weak, squeezed her hand. His voice cracked, but carried across the hall. "I had everything: wealth, power, 28 trained experts. And still, it was you, who had nothing, gave me everything back. My life." His words pierced the silence like thunder. Some guests wept openly now, their earlier arrogance broken. A few lowered their heads in shame. The girl tried to pull her hand away, whispering, "Please, don't thank me." Anyone would have done the same, but deep inside, she knew it wasn't true. They couldn't. They hadn't seen what she saw. The billionaire's voice grew steadier. "Don't faint. You are no ordinary girl. Tonight, you are the reason I live." The hall erupted. Some applauded with trembling hands, others shouted praise. A few still scoffed, unwilling to accept a reality where a poor girl had outshone them all. But no matter how they felt, the truth stood tall in front of them. The powerless had become powerful. The invisible had become unforgettable. The paramedics began packing their equipment. Defeated yet relieved, their leader approached the girl quietly. "What you did, it was brave," he admitted. "You saw what we missed. Never let anyone tell you your eyes or your mind are worth less because of who you are." Alina nodded silently, tears rolling down her cheeks. She looked at the billionaire, still alive because of her, and at the sea of faces staring at her in disbelief. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. For the first time, the world had no choice but to see her, yet even as admiration filled the room, a dark tension lingered. Some guests whispered jealously, unable to bear that their wealth and status meant nothing compared to her simple courage. One man muttered coldly, "If she could embarrass trained paramedics tonight, who knows what she might dare tomorrow?" But Alina did not hear them. She only heard the sound of the billionaire's breathing, the sound of life. She only felt his weak grip around her hand, the silent promise of gratitude in his eyes. And though she did not know it yet, this night, this single act of courage, would change her life forever. For tonight was not only the revelation of truth. Tonight was the beginning of a story far greater than she had ever imagined. Asterisk aftermath, and Moral Hall was still trembling with silence. When the billionaire drew his first steady breath, the heart monitor beeped softly, no longer racing toward death, but clinging to life with fragile determination. The paramedics, exhausted and ashamed, stood back in quiet defeat. Their uniforms no longer looked powerful. Their machines no longer looked invincible. But in the center of the stage, where chandeliers poured golden light, a strange picture remained. The richest man in the city lying weak on the floor, and a poor girl, a servant, holding his hand as if she were the only anchor keeping him from drifting away again. The guests were torn. Some clapped with trembling hands, others murmured in disbelief, and a few turned away, their pride wounded by the truth. For how could this be? How could a girl who scrubbed dishes and carried trays succeed where 28 professionals had failed? The billionaire opened his eyes again, this time with more strength. He scanned the faces of the crowd, faces he had known for years. Politicians who praised him in public but whispered envy in private. Business partners who smiled while plotting behind his back. Even family members who valued his fortune more than his presence, but none of them had saved him. His gaze returned to Alina, the trembling girl kneeling beside him. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red, her small hand still clutching his. She looked terrified, as though she feared she had overstepped her place. Yet to him, she looked like the only truth in a room full of illusions. With great effort, the billionaire raised his hand and pointed weakly at her. His voice cracked, but it carried enough power to silence the hall. "This girl," he whispered. Then, louder, "This girl saved my life." Gasps echoed. The words struck like thunder. He coughed, but continued, his tone gaining strength. "All my wealth, all my companies, all the people I trusted, none of it mattered tonight. It was her, a servant girl, unseen by all of you, who saw what no one else could. Without her, I would not be speaking now." The hall erupted in murmurs. Some nodded in agreement, tears in their eyes. Others shook their heads, unable to accept such humiliation. The billionaire squeezed her hand gently. "What is your name?" he asked. Alina lowered her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alina, sir, Alina," he repeated, as though carving it into memory. "Remember this name, for tonight, she is the reason I live." Some guests applauded, their claps echoing against the marble walls. Others joined reluctantly, their pride bending under the weight of truth. But even amid the applause, envy lingered. A man in a black suit muttered coldly, "This girl is dangerous. She embarrassed us all." The paramedic leader stepped forward, his shoulders heavy. He bowed his head slightly, his voice low. "She was right. We overlooked the airway. We failed him. She saved him." The admission stung like fire, but he could not deny it. Alina shook her head quickly. "No, I didn't mean to shame anyone. I only did what I knew. I only wanted him to live." Her humility broke the hearts of many who listened. She had no pride in her victory, no hunger for attention, only relief that she had saved a life. The billionaire looked at her with eyes soft but fierce. "You are poor, yes, but you are rich in something no money can buy, courage." His words made her tremble. Never had anyone spoken to her like that. For years, she had been invisible, just another nameless servant among thousands. But tonight, she was seen, truly seen. The billionaire tried to sit up, but the paramedics urged him to stay down. Even so, his voice rose, stronger than before. "From this day, Alina will not return to washing dishes or carrying trays. She belongs to a greater path. If she wishes, I will fund her education, her future, whatever she dreams of. For the one who gave me life deserves the chance to live hers fully." A wave of shock swept through the hall. The poor girl's eyes widened, her lips parting in disbelief. She shook her head furiously, tears falling again. "No, sir, I didn't do it for reward. I only did what anyone should have done." The billionaire smiled weakly. "That is why you deserve it most. Because you did it not for gain, but for humanity." The crowd erupted again, this time not in panic, but in argument. Some clapped loudly, cheering the promise. Others hissed, jealousy twisting their faces. "Ridiculous," one woman spat under her breath. "A servant girl turned into a hero? This will shame us all." Another man whispered to his neighbor, "If he lifts her up, she may one day stand higher than us. We cannot allow that." But the majority could not deny the truth. Their eyes had seen it. Their ears had heard it. The billionaire lived because of her, and nothing they said could erase that. The hall slowly filled with applause, louder and louder, until the golden chandeliers shook with the sound. Alina, overwhelmed, buried her face in her hands. She did not want fame. She did not want riches. She only wanted peace. But fate had chosen her, and there was no turning back now. The paramedics wheeled the billionaire onto a stretcher, preparing to take him to the hospital. But even as they moved him, his hand never let go of hers. He whispered one final time before leaving the hall, "You reminded me tonight that even a king can fall, and even a servant can rise. Never forget that, Alina." As the stretcher rolled out, the guests followed in silence. Some bowed their heads in respect, others whispered with envy. The grand hall, once filled with arrogance and laughter, now felt like a temple sacred with the weight of truth. Alina stood alone on the stage, the applause fading, the chandeliers dimming. She looked at the spot on the floor where the piece of food still lay, the small thing that had nearly ended a great man's life. She realized then that destiny does not choose the rich or the powerful. Destiny chooses the brave, and though she was still poor, still invisible in the world's eyes, Alina carried within her a power greater than wealth, the power to see, to act, to save. That night would be remembered forever, not as the night of a billionaire's birthday, but as the night a poor girl saved him when all others failed.